You walk into a hospital today and you immediately understand the transaction. Insurance card, clipboard, waiting room with chairs designed to be just uncomfortable enough that you don't fall asleep, but just comfortable enough that you can't complain. A television playing the news in a corner nobody asked for, and somewhere behind the walls, invisible and vast, a financial machine so complex that the people running it barely understand it themselves. It feels modern. It feels like a uniquely contemporary disaster. Here's where it gets strange. Every single economic tension inside that building, the funding models, the supply chains, the labor arrangements, the survival math, the permanent war between care and cost, none of it is modern. All of it is ancient. The first people who built dedicated healing institutions on Earth were solving the exact same equation that hospital administrators solve today. How do you keep sick people alive when keeping sick people alive costs more than sick people can pay? The answers they found were sophisticated, strange, occasionally ruthless, and almost never what the history books describe. Because when you pull back the curtain on the ancient world's greatest hospitals, what looks like pure religious charity turns out to be something else entirely. It turns out to be a business, a surprisingly well-run one. Part 1. The Myth versus the Machine. The year is 280 BCE. You are standing outside the Asclepion of Epidaurus, Greece. The air smells of pine resin and burning incense. Pilgrims move past you in near silence, some limping, some carried on wooden stretchers. They have traveled for days, some for weeks. They are here because the god Asclepius heals the sick inside these walls. That is what they believe. That is also what most historians wrote for centuries. Divine intervention, sacred ritual, pure spiritual charity delivered by priest-physicians in the name of the gods. Clean, noble, spiritual, and almost completely wrong as a complete picture. Because behind those temple walls was something nobody discussed in polite historical company: a budget. Classical historian Hans Ulrich Wiemer at the University of Vienna spent years analyzing the administrative records of ancient healing sanctuaries. What he found was not a spiritual retreat funded by divine goodwill. It was an economic institution with identifiable income streams, operating costs, labor hierarchies, supply dependencies, and a very real capacity to collapse financially. The gods, it turns out, needed accountants, and those accountants were remarkably good at their jobs. Part 2. Who paid for it? The revenue models of ancient medicine, the funding architecture of ancient hospitals is one of the most underexplored stories in economic history. And it was not simple. It was not uniform. And it looked completely different depending on which civilization you were standing in. In Egypt, the great healing temples at Dendera and Kom Ombo operated on a donation and endowment economy. Pilgrims brought offerings when they arrived. Wealthy patrons endowed the sanctuaries with land grants and agricultural income. The temple owned fields. The fields produced grain. The grain fed patients, paid staff, and stocked the remedy stores. This is not charity. This is structurally an endowment fund generating operating revenue from productive assets. The Greeks refined this model at the Asclepia. Excavations at Epidaurus, documented extensively by archaeologist Vincenzo Caputo in the 1950s, revealed not just medical facilities and sleeping halls but extensive administrative buildings, grain storehouses, and clear evidence of a multi-layered income system. Worshippers paid consultation fees. Patients who recovered made Thanksgiving donations, sometimes substantial ones. Wealthy benefactors received their names inscribed permanently on stone. Of course, they inscribed the donors' names for eternity. Wealthy people in the ancient world were exactly as interested in public recognition as wealthy people are today. 2,500 years of human nature. Not a single thing has changed. Rome took a completely different approach. The Roman Valetudinarium, the military hospital, was funded directly from the imperial military budget. Archaeologists excavating the legionary fortress at Inchtuthil in Scotland in 1961 uncovered a hospital complex built to house 60 beds, constructed to a standardized architectural plan that appeared identically across the Roman Empire from Britain to Syria. Standardized, scaled. Centrally funded, auditable. This was not charity, this was infrastructure investment with a clear return calculation. A sick soldier cannot march. A soldier who cannot march cannot hold a frontier. A frontier that cannot be held costs the empire territory and tax revenue. The math was clean and unsentimental. Medical care was strategic, not humanitarian. But the most sophisticated funding model of the ancient world came from a civilization that most Western history courses treat as a footnote. Part 3. The Way AQF. The most elegant hospital funding mechanism ever invented. The year is 805 CE. You are in Baghdad at the height of the Abbasid Caliphate. The Caliph Harun al-Rashid has just ordered the construction of the first true public hospital in the Islamic world, the bimaristan. A Persian word meaning house of the sick, not a temple, not a military facility, not a sanctuary for pilgrims who can afford to travel. A public institution open to every patient regardless of religion, wealth, ethnicity, or social standing, free of charge, to everyone. Here's where it gets strange. It didn't collapse financially, it thrived, and it kept thriving for centuries after the caliph who ordered it built was long dead. The mechanism was the Waqf, a religious endowment system in which wealthy donors permanently transferred ownership of productive assets, land, commercial properties, entire market districts to a legally protected trust whose income was irrevocably dedicated to the hospital's operation. The hospital did not own the income-generating assets, the Waqf did. The hospital received the revenue. This meant that no caliph, no political heir, no creditor, no invading force could legally seize the hospital's financial foundation. The endowment was structurally protected from political interference in a way that almost no other funding mechanism in the ancient world achieved. Historian Ahmad Dalal at Georgetown University described the Waqf system as one of the most durable institutional funding mechanisms in all of pre-modern history. Some bimaristans operated continuously for over 300 years on endowments established at their founding. 300 years of uninterrupted operational funding. The average modern hospital system survives a budget crisis approximately every 18 months. The ancients had figured out something that modern healthcare finance has never fully solved, but the revenue side was only half the equation. The cost side is where it gets genuinely interesting. Part 4. The cost side, supply chains, inventory, and the margin of survival. Running an ancient hospital was an exercise in ruthless, continuous logistics management. Staff had to be fed and housed, buildings required constant maintenance, medical supplies had to be sourced from trade networks that stretched across multiple continents and involved dozens of intermediaries, each one adding cost and risk to every transaction. A single papyrus from Roman Egypt, analyzed in detail by classicist John Scarborough at the University of Wisconsin, itemizes the medical supply requirements for a regional healing facility in the 2nd century CE: frankincense from southern Arabia, silphium resin from the North African coast, opium derivatives from the eastern Mediterranean, copper sulfate compounds from the mines of Cyprus, willow bark, and honey, enormous, almost industrial quantities of honey used as a primary antimicrobial agent in wound treatment. Every single item on that list required an active trade relationship, a merchant contact, a price negotiation conducted across language barriers, a storage system that prevented spoilage in a world without refrigeration, a rotation schedule that ensured older stock was used before newer arrivals. This is inventory management. This is supply chain logistics. This is structurally and operationally identical to what a modern hospital pharmacy does. The difference is that the ancient supply chain manager was coordinating shipments across the Mediterranean with no telephone, no contract enforcement mechanism beyond personal reputation, and no guarantee that the vessel carrying the frankincense from Arabia would not sink somewhere between Alexandria and the port of Ostia. And here is the concept that makes the economics of ancient hospitals genuinely terrifying to contemplate: the margin of survival. Ancient healing institutions operated on almost no financial buffer whatsoever. A single epidemic that filled every bed simultaneously destroyed the supply budget within weeks. A military defeat that redirected imperial funding could collapse an entire network of military hospitals overnight. A famine that emptied the surrounding agricultural land cut off both patient donations and staff food supplies simultaneously. Most critically, the death of a single major patron could eliminate an entire institution's primary operating income in a single season. The Asclepion at Corinth, once one of the most prominent healing sanctuaries in the Greek world, declined into functional abandonment within 2 generations of losing its primary aristocratic benefactors. The building did not fall, the funding did. The institution did not fail medically, it failed economically. Part 5. Labor as the hidden capital. Here is something that almost never appears in standard ancient medical histories. The labor was structured to be as inexpensive as possible. Not through slavery, though, that existed in some institutional contexts, through something considerably more sophisticated: the apprenticeship system as a cost management tool. In both Greek and Islamic medical traditions, junior physicians worked under senior physicians for years in exchange for training rather than wages. They received housing, meals, and education. The institution received skilled labor at close to zero direct cost. This is, economically, an internship program with a 2,000-year head start. At the Great Bimaristan of Cairo, the Mansouri Hospital, founded in 1284, administrative records analyzed by historian Michael Dawes at California State University documented a deliberately tiered labor cost structure. Senior physicians received full salaries, junior physicians received modest stipends, students received food, lodging, and access to patients. The labor cost curve was intentionally graduated from maximum cost at the top to near zero at the bottom. The institution captured expensive expertise for complex cases. It captured inexpensive volume labor for routine care. This is, structurally, the staffing model of every modern teaching hospital on Earth. The ancient world invented it out of necessity. Modern medicine institutionalized it and called it a residency program. Ancient medical students would have recognized the arrangement immediately. They also would have had opinions about the hours. Part 6. Comparative Outcomes. What success actually meant. Here is a question that the ancient hospital records force you to ask. What did a successful ancient hospital actually look like? Not medically, economically. The answer is more complex than it appears. For Egyptian temple sanatoriums, success was measured in patron satisfaction and pilgrimage volume. More pilgrims meant more donations, meant operational continuity. A healed patient who told others about the temple was marketing. A healed patient who made a large Thanksgiving donation was revenue. The medical outcome and the economic outcome were aligned. For Roman military hospitals, success was measured in soldier return rates. A valetudinarium that returned soldiers to active duty faster than its peer facilities received better funding from the imperial quartermaster. Medical efficiency directly determined budget allocation. For Islamic bimaristans, success carried an additional dimension that neither Egypt nor Rome had built into their systems. The bimaristans' social mandate required that it treat the poor without payment. This was not optional charity, it was a founding condition of the Waqf endowment. This created a permanent economic tension inside every bimaristan that operated. The wealthy patients whose donations could sustain the institution were being treated in the same wards as the poor patients whose presence fulfilled the institution's legal mandate. Managing that tension without alienating the wealthy patients whose goodwill funded the entire operation was the central economic challenge of Islamic hospital administration. It remains the central challenge of hospital administration today. Closing tonight somewhere near you, a hospital is running, there are lights on inside, there are people in pain in beds that cost more per night than a luxury hotel room. There are physicians who trained for over a decade working shifts that would have been considered inhumane in any other industry, and somewhere in that building an administrator is staring at a spreadsheet trying to figure out how to keep the whole thing financially viable for one more quarter. The ancient Egyptians built the first version of that problem 4,000 years ago. They would recognize everything about it. The tension between care and cost is not a modern failure of policy or political will or corporate greed, though it is also sometimes all of those things. It is something older. It is structural. It is what happens when the most expensive thing a civilization does is also the thing no civilization can afford to stop doing. The Islamic bimaristans came closer than anyone to solving it. 300 years of free universal care, funded by protected endowments, sustained without government dependency or private profit motive. And then the legal structures that protected the Waqf networks were dismantled, first by Ottoman administrative reforms, then by colonial legal systems that had no framework for understanding an institution that was neither government nor private. The buildings still stand in some cities. Cairo, Damascus, Istanbul, the stone is still there. The funding mechanism is gone. Nobody has rebuilt it. If you stand outside a hospital tonight and look up at the lit windows, you are looking at something that has existed in one form or another since the first Egyptian priest-physician looked at a line of sick pilgrims outside a temple wall and quietly calculated whether the grain stores could feed them all. The calculation has never stopped. It has never been fully solved, and the most elegant solution anyone ever found to it was invented over 1,000 years ago, operated for 3 centuries, and then was quietly taken apart by people who didn't understand what they were destroying. The question that the historical record cannot answer is whether anyone will rebuild it, or whether we will keep running the same calculation, in the same fluorescent lit rooms, on the same slightly too uncomfortable chairs, for another 4,000 years.